Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. And again, today we're joined by Dr. Andrew Weaver from North Carolina State University. And we thought we'd get him on here because we think he just knows more about this than I do. So I got a question from a listener talking about or asking about line breeding. And I think it's something that every producer starting out, or anybody that starts out with sheep, they always have just a handful of sheep, and they are kind of faced with this proposition that they're going to have to buy a new ram every year. And so they start right away thinking about line breeding. And while I've always found it intriguing, it's way over my head. I think to be able to do it and do it correctly. There's a lot more to it than just, oh, you can breed them back to the daughters and everything will be fine.
Yeah, when you say it's intriguing, is there some also fear related with that you're going to mess up a bunch of sheep, have a bunch of sheep with two heads?
Yeah, there is. I did a good bit of line breeding in rabbits, and these were, at worst, they were always just going to be meat rabbits. And so people would ask me all the time, if I'd breed the mothers or the, fathers to the daughters, what do I get? And I always tell them rabbits. And it just, you just never sure. And I had some crosses where, or matings like that, where I had some goofy teeth and weird toes, but nothing, worse than that.
Yeah, I think we always joke about this old saying that it's line breeding if it works and it's inbreeding if it doesn't,
Yep.
because ultimately they're really the same thing. One we think of with more of a positive connotation and positive outcomes, and the other one we think about associated with a lot of negative things. So I it can have advantages, and certainly, as Cam alluded to, there's maybe some things to consider or be aware of before we just jump into it with both feet.
And I also think there's a level of like what we'd call anthropomorphism. So applying human emotion to animals. And so we understand in a human setting, line breeding is frowned upon quite significantly. And we make jokes about it and it's all in good fun, but those are our thoughts. I've talked to a lot of people like, oh, I can't do that. That's just not right. Or, that's we're applying a human emotion to or human ethics to our genetic selection protocols. So that's something too that at least I've come across, people that just don't feel comfortable with it. And I'm not saying that they're wrong for that. That's their livestock and it's up to them on how they're going to manage them. But that's, I think, an interesting perspective on this topic.
Yeah,
So what are some of the
I know in a lot of different breeds, in the horse industry, dairy industry, probably the beef industry as well. Um, a lot of the superior genetics have come from very well thought out line breeding.
Right.
well,
I mean,
and you mentioned that
if you think about wanting to produce animals that possess specific traits that breed true, and what I mean by breed true is they're going to pass those, they have a high likelihood of passing those traits onto their offspring. So they're very predictable in how they breed. Those genetic lines are line bred. That's how you increase that predictability, and you select for those traits that you value, and you make those traits, you concentrate those traits through line breeding, and then it is a high likelihood that the resulting offspring will also possess those traits.
and you mentioned the dairy industry, Tom. I know, and I don't know the specific name of Holstein Bull, but we look at genetics and that individual is in an insane like 80+% of pedigrees of modern genetics. I mean, there's some crazy examples of identifying elite individuals and then using and we see the same thing in horses as
Yeah.
well. I mean, that's a very similar situation when we're talking that genetic selection. So when we're thinking about these principles of of deciding where we want to go with that line breeding, or trying to capitalize on lining up those positive traits. Is it a guarantee that we're going to line up positive traits, or is there a likelihood that those negative traits are going to also line up?
Yes, that's a great point you bring up. So as I mentioned before, line breeding and inbreeding, really we're talking about sort of the same thing with using different terms in terms of, relative to what our desired outcome is. And so at the same time where we're trying to concentrate the positive traits, we also increase the likelihood of those recessive genetic defects, poor performance associated traits being more prevalent as well. And so that's what we typically think of associated with inbreeding, right? We think about we're going to decrease number of lambs born, we're going to decrease fertility, we're going to see a greater incidence in the occurrence of genetic defects that are controlled by those recessive alleles. And that all can happen. And if we want to think about it from a positive stance for a second, it allows us to identify if you have a lamb that's born with a genetic defect, with one of those traits that's controlled by a recessive allele, you know that both of its parents are carriers. And so it allows you to identify, yes, it's a bummer that lamb had that trait, expressed that trait, but now you know both parents are carriers, and then you can make appropriate selection decisions in future years regarding the parents. And so that can be a positive from it, but we can also see a general decrease in performance as a result of that inbreeding depression. But in the same way that we're concentrating those negative traits, there's also opportunity for improvement of traits, desirable traits. And so if you select, if there's a genetic line that's known for growth, and you line those animals up to maybe a specific common ancestor that possesses those genes for improved growth, you may see improved growth in that offspring, and that resulting offspring will probably pass that improved growth onto its offspring. And so it's this idea of we're increasing what we call homozygosity, so the similarity in those genetic pairs. So you think we have those alleles, we have two alleles associated with each gene, and those alleles, if they differ, that's what we call heterozygosity. If they're the same, that's called what we call homozygosity. They're the same. So as we breed individuals with common ancestry, we are increasing the number of like pairs, the number of similar, same alleles for those different genes. And so we know that if an individual, let's just say, is AA, has the same allele, two pairs of it, we know that the resulting offspring is going to get an A, right? If that individual is an AB, is heterozygous, we don't know, is that animal going to pass on the A allele to its offspring, or is it going to pass along the B allele to its offspring? And so with the heterozygous, like crossbred type individual, they breed less true. We don't know, they're less predictable. We don't know what they're going to pass on to the next generation. With an individual that's more line bred, that has more homozygous pairs, then we know, we have a better idea, or we can predict what that individual is going to pass on to that next generation.
And to that point, so the AA, AB example, in a breeding scheme, and this is crude, that other individual that we're breeding it to is going to be AA or AB. And so passing on one of those, if both are AA, then the likelihood of getting those A's in the offspring are drastically increased. And that's what we're shooting for in those positive traits.
Exactly. Like if an A is associated with an extra 5 pounds at weaning, and two A's are associated with an extra 10 pounds at weaning, then if I can get a bunch of AA individuals, I can make a lot heavier lambs. Where the ABs, if a B is associated with a decrease in 5 pounds at weaning, an AB individual is just going to be average. And so if I can stack those genes, those positive traits, and through a controlled, systematic line breeding system, I can actually improve performance in certain traits. But just be conscious that at the same time we're improving those favorable traits, I'm just going to use scrapie resistance, for example. The likelihood of getting a QQ is also going to increase.
Yeah, especially if parents possess
If the
that
parents are
Q.
carriers.
Yep. Yeah, and also, we were talking genetic defects. Those are not always terminal. I think a lot of times we think in line bred individuals, if it goes poorly, then it's dead automatically dead when it comes out, and that's not always the case. And so the risk associated is not as severe as what I think we put onto those systems. And so one of the reasons I wanted to ask Andrew to come on during your time at Michigan State. You had helped out in the sheep barn, and they were known for Suffolk sheep that were very predictable in offspring that they were producing. Those were enrolled in NSIP, and when we look at pedigree lineage, a lot of commonality between individuals that were being mated together. And so you had some unique experiences there, just seeing how line breeding was carried out in a seed stock scenario to ultimately go into the commercial sector and produce lambs that were predictable. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about just kind of your experience there and what you saw and just overall thoughts.
Yeah, and I think we can kind of preface it with the philosophy that we see this in agronomy and breeding, plant breeding. If you take two very line bred strains, bloodlines, and you cross those, you are going to increase the amount of heterozygosity and the level of hybrid vigor and thriftiness and the resulting crossbred offspring. And so if you take when breeding corn, if you take, one line of corn that's really inbred, another line of corn that's really inbred, line bred, they're selected for specific traits. And then we cross those two lines of corn and make our hybrid varieties, we are going to see a tremendous increase, because now you take an AA line, you cross it with a BB line. Now, all the resulting offspring are now AB for the majority of their genes. And then that AB, that difference in those alleles will result in that hybrid vigor, that performance above and beyond what we'd expect from the parents. And so we can see that in animals as well. And so if we take and we select and we breed line up a sheep for a specific trait, and then we have another genetic line that may be lined up for a different trait or different common ancestor, and then we cross those, we can get a ton of performance in our crossbred offspring in the commercial sector. And so in breeding, I have some experience during my undergrad and with the Suffolk program there at Michigan State, and we kept things pretty tight. And I remember we bred a ewe back to one of her sons, and the offspring maybe aren't the thriftiest the day they're born. But if you can keep those things alive, man, they grow like weeds once they get on feed. But you take those sheep and they're predictable. I mean, when they're born, that every single lamb has extreme genetic potential for growth. And it's going to happen. And so you take those genetic lines and you cross them on a maternal bred white-faced sheep, and those speckle-faced lambs for the commercial producer, the commercial feeder, are going to be phenomenal.
And it goes back to the point that it takes good purebreds to make good crossbreds.
Exactly. Good purebreds to make good crossbreds. And so in the seed stock sector, we probably need to consider, strategic line breeding probably more than what we do. Because I think it's going to be of benefit to our commercial customers when they purchase those lines of sheep and then cross those in their program. They're going to get that. They're going to be able to, further capitalize on that hybrid vigor. And so we did that. We've done it. I've had some experience with it in the Suffolk program, in the Dorset deal, even the Dorsets that we're breeding right now, and we work a lot with Virginia Tech and several other breeders. There's the Dorset sheep, there's kind of some sheep that are selected more on the maternal direction. Other Dorsets are selected more in the terminal direction. There's not a lot of seed stock Dorset breeders out there. especially in the NSIP world. And so, we keep things pretty tight. There's a few kind of very influential rams that have made a tremendous impact on the breed, especially in the NSIP Dorset population. And we've kind of, strategically lined up those individuals to be able to possess those traits that are unique to those lines. And so, my cutoff is about 12.5% inbreeding. That's kind of what I've always heard and always used is if it's over 12.5%, I'm gonna try to shy away from that and find something different. But if it's below that, it's fair game.
And that's really coming down to like risk versus reward.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
that
you know what
12 and
that
a half,
inbreeding depression might look like, and
right. And that's the kind of, we'll call it the sweet spot. And maybe it's that upper threshold because as we extend past that, we see that inbreeding depression. But at that point, all of the homozygosity that we're shooting for is improving productivity. And like that's something I feel like we don't talk about because it's really hard to quantify. Um, all of our sheep are not labeled AA, AB, BB, right down their
we can
back
only
or on
test
their
for a handful of those traits, but we know
right.
there are tens of thousands of base
Yeah.
pairs, and
And
uh,
if they were labeled, maybe then we could say, well, we could go one more round and tighten this up a little bit more. But I mean, we are playing with stuff that's behind the curtain, and we're not going to see until something negative occurs. But we are seeing improvement from that homozygosity in those individuals, selecting for those positive traits. And I think that's the biggest thing is we're not just doing it for the sake of extending a ram for an extra breeding season. We're doing it because I can take a very poor performing ram and line breed those genetics and end up with sheep that are not very good. And
right, they're
so it's
terrible.
yeah, I mean, if I have a ram with really bad traits, and I think that if I implement a line breeding genetic selection model with poor genetics starting out, I'm not going to automatically improve or fix what exists in
Right,
those offspring.
it's going to exaggerate every trait in the positive and negative direction. So good traits, you're going to exaggerate. You have the chance to exaggerate in the positive direction. Bad traits, you're going to exaggerate those just as fast in the negative direction. So we have to be careful and strategic in what we're doing and how we're doing it. I remember
And it's not just the traits that we're measuring. It's all of those traits that we're trying to quantify, their phenotypic traits. I mean, it's looking at all of the traits because we don't get to pick and choose which which ones they have and which ones they don't. But you were
right,
saying
and you
you have
might
an
end up
example.
And you might end up with that stellar, you end up with that stellar you or that stellar ram, and you decide that individual needs to be kind of a cornerstone in your operation. And you get some offspring, you get some daughters, get some sons, you decide to start crossing those, and trying to line things back up to that stellar individual that you found. And what you might not realize is that stellar individual may possess some uh, some undesirable traits that were maybe held in the recessive form that weren't expressed in that stellar individual. Well, once you get 2 or 3 generations down the line and you've created a line bred population back to that ram, all of a sudden maybe some undesirable traits start showing up. And I'm just throwing out an example. Maybe horn status is maybe that individual is a carrier for the horn gene. You don't notice it. A couple generations later, you're selecting for another trait, and all of a sudden, all the offspring start showing up with horns. And you had no desire. You didn't select for horns, but that was kind of hidden in the background and started showing up as you line those individuals up for it. Maybe those individuals are stellar for maternal traits or parasite resistance or whatever it might be, but then they've got that individual happened to be a carrier. And that's how I think a lot of if you look historically at like the cattle industry and the genetic defects that have shown up in that industry, there have been some stellar bulls that are, incredible for certain traits and out there and breed leaders. and they've possessed these genetic defects that hide in the background that don't show up until a few generations of lining individuals up. And so that's one thing to be cautious of, and just aware of, that it can happen. Yeah, I was going to mention,
Yeah, and
while I was in graduate school, I remember we were putting a couple Dorset rams every year on the Glade Spring ram test. And so we'd put take a few Dorsets down for it, and see how they kind of hold up against all the hair sheep. And I remember one year we had a Dorset that ranked, he was third on test for fecal egg count. I think his average test fecal egg count was 100. And so, even in the Katahdin world, we think that's, really good on that deal. And so to have a Dorset that can, hold its own that well with the Katahdins, I was pretty excited about that. And so I was talking to Dr. Notter about that, and he's like, well, if you ever have an individual that possesses a unique trait and you want to find out if there's a genetic component to that, and you want to find out if that individual actually has the genes for that specific trait you're interested in, breed it back to its parent. And when you breed it back, this ram lamb, breed it back to its mother. And if the resulting offspring also are low fecal egg count, there's something to it. If it's not, well, maybe that was a fluke. But that's one, you breed them back to its parent. I know that's lining up real close, but they will. If there's a trait there, that's going to maximize the opportunity or the chance that you're going to actually observe it and replicate that trait.
yeah, and it's one generation. It's one breeding season. You do it, you analyze the data, and if it works, what do you do with all of those progeny out of that mating? If you find it works, then you kind of just hit the lottery for that trait. Especially I like this example because it's a breed of sheep that isn't selecting as hard for parasite resistance. And so all of a sudden, say we have that son to dam model, and she throws ram lambs that are consistently follow that same pattern of parasite resistance. And now you've got the ability to generate a genetic line of parasite resistant Dorset in a very short period of time. If it works and it proves out. The one thing you had mentioned earlier, on heterosis and in the crossbreeding model, but I also think that we can't overlook the need for those tightly bred individuals for outcrosses within a breed. And so even in our purebred models, instead of going and trying to find an outcross every single year, find what's working for us, hone in on it, stay with that particular genetic line. And then it's way easier if we've got some individuals that are creeping up in that inbreeding coefficient and they're good sheep. I can go over there I still look at the pedigree, but we don't have common ancestors in, 40 different flocks and say, oh, I can't use that ram because it's too closely related, which is something that is and has been a problem in a lot of breeds, that we don't have access to new proven outcross genetics. And so, if we were to tighten those up as individuals, it would expand the opportunities to go out and bring in sheep to assist with the longevity of those genetic lines.
Right. And there's a lot of potential there. Even if you're breeding, let's just use Katahdins as an example. You have specific lines of Katahdin sheep, and then afford the opportunity to, even within your own operation, if you have maybe a more of a nucleus flock and then a commercial set, or if your customers, maybe raise the same breed, but you can sell them a group of lambs out of one specific line for a few years and sell them rams out of another line for a few years. And it gives them the opportunity to continue their breeding program, realize a little bit of hybrid vigor, heterosis, even within maybe a purebred population, just because you're increasing heterozygosity, and still be able to maintain a a pure breed of sheep. So certainly opportunity. Yeah, glad you brought that up. And I think
Yeah,
too.
and it's something that I don't know is we get into these other areas of sheep production, and the one segment that I don't know if I'd say they have it figured out, but I mean it's as close to having it figured out as possible. And a lot of it's just phenotypic selection. But if we look at the club lamb side of the sheep industry, you go back, and Andrew, I know you're familiar with it, and it, get get into that side of those pedigree selections. But you go back 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago now, and um, to have competitive sheep that didn't go back to a ram whose name was Burn, that came from Rural Sheep Company uh, out in Iowa, South Dakota, Iowa.
Burn would have been a Colorado sheep, I believe.
Okay. Um, but like those, you see these individuals uh, that make a big impact in a very short period of time at a very young age, and all of a sudden they explode across the country. One of the reasons why is reproductive technologies. So utilizing artificial insemination, that ram didn't travel all across the US to breed a bunch of ewes, but shipped semen all over the place. Another ram, a little more recent, uh, ram named Bullseye, that John Schroyer had possession of up in Ohio. And again, for a long time, good luck finding competitive sheep on good luck finding competitive sheep that didn't have that in the pedigree on the sire dam side. And again, it all comes back to those reproductive technologies, which on the commercial side of the industry, I know it can get a little pricey, but uh, we're not taking advantage of those technologies to really push some of these genetic strategies and put those into place.
Yeah, and speaking of genetic technology, I think there's two kind of philosophies out there. You know, do you line up to the sire side of the pedigree or the dam side of the pedigree? And I would argue that there's significant value to lining up to the dam side of the pedigree. And you look at a lot of very influential males, whether they be bulls, rams, whatever it might be in the industry. Oftentimes those individuals go back to maternal lines that have been very strategically bred. Um, the challenge in the sheep world is that embryo transfer is not as successful as in the cattle world. So in the cattle world, you see a lot of strategic line breeding, with on the maternal side of the pedigree, and you can replicate a cow very quickly because embryo transfer in cattle is quite successful. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and a very influential. They're talking about a very influential red Angus cow, and I don't want to say an exact number because I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was in the thousands of progeny range. And you think about that's a female producing thousands of progeny in her lifetime. Yeah, bull can do that because of artificial insemination, but it's pretty impressive for a cow to be able to do that. And you think about the opportunity to propagate maternal genetics and especially mitochondrial DNA. That's kind of a hot topic right now. We know that all the DNA in the mitochondria of an individual comes from the maternal side. It's 100% maternal, and so if there are specific traits passed in the mitochondrial DNA, that only comes from mom. So if we have a ewe that is really good, we know that her offspring will have those traits, but the sire won't influence that. And
So
so
what is the role of the mitochondria, Andrew? For
so it's
those
like
that
the powerhouse of the cell. It's going to produce
yeah,
energy. It's the powerhouse there, and so there's a lot of discussion, especially around the world of feed efficiency and overall efficiency of production. Maintenance requirements, upkeep, things like that. Potentially being
ability
associated
to
with mitochondrial
ability
DNA.
to convert stuff coming in and then producing, it's the powerhouse, it's the power plant. And so if it takes less, there's a lower rate of respiration that's occurring there. Those animals are, the way they're converting that energy is more efficient, which is very intriguing.
It's really interesting. And the fact that it's passed maternally is even makes it even more interesting.
Which is a little annoying, just because if it was a paternal pasture, we could impact offspring much more rapidly.
Oh, we can make progress in a hurry.
Yeah.
And that's where, embryo transfer, especially within the kind of production sheep sector, is probably underutilized in the seed stock world. I think there's potential. It's expensive. I'm not going to deny it. It is expensive. It's not nearly as successful as it is in the cattle world. But I think at the same time, what we know and what we've observed in the cattle industry in terms of being able to propagate very influential cow families, I think there's opportunity in the sheep world to do that. Alternatively, you can propagate sire lines. And if you have a really influential ram, you can line things up back to that ram, and do it from the sire side of the pedigree. You're missing out on potential mitochondrial influences, whatever they might be. But there are cattle examples, there are sheep examples, where line breeding to a specific ram or bull has been very successful. So I don't want to deny that, that sire, having that influential sire as the common ancestor is not going to be beneficial. It certainly could be. There's certainly opportunity there. But I think also that maternal side just really intrigues me and what potential it has. We just have to be able to propagate the maternal side a lot faster.
And when we're talking embryo transfer, it's something that we have to have a good ewe, but just like our line breeding strategies, if we don't have the ram to generate improved prospects out of that ewe, what's the point of spending the money? So it takes two elite individuals to justify the cost to really seek that genetic progress. But so Tom, after this discussion, you've been kind of quiet. Are you gonna go out and start breeding a bunch of sheep back to each other?
Gonna go back and start looking at pedigrees and see if there's something. I don't know. There's still an awful lot to it. I feel like we could have a whole nother discussion on just how you would start something like this.
Yeah. I mean, this is something, a lot of it's conservation of genetics. So we had an old, he's a 2013 model sheep that has done a really nice job producing low input sheep with increased longevity, and bred him to a set of his daughters last year, to try to line up as many of his positive genetics as possible, and ended up with some good looking ram lambs this spring, and then he died this winter. So I've been able to capture, whether they work out or not, it's at least provided an opportunity for me to capture as much of his genetic content as I can in a natural breeding situation. And if we want to use it in the future, we can.
Yeah.
But I'll paraphrase a quote from Jay Lush, who wrote the Animal Breeding Plans book. He said, breed the best to the best regardless of relationship. And if there's two individuals that possess the traits we want, just breed them. And that I'm speaking within the seed stock sector. We kind of preface this whole talk with, what we've discussed today is very oriented at the seed stock sector of the business. If you are a commercial producer, I would shy away and probably not put a whole lot of emphasis on line breeding, because our goal in the commercial sector is to maximize productivity. And we know that the easiest way to do that is through crossbreeding and heterosis. And so if you're in the commercial sector, you can buy your stud rams from those specific lines and those seed stock breeders doing it. But I would not recommend you utilizing line breeding as a commercial breeder. If you're a seed stock producer, there's a lot of opportunity here that we can probably take advantage of.
Yeah. Well, it's been a good discussion. A lot to think of. Geez. I don't know. I'm gonna have to back listen to this several times, I think. Because there's still an awful I still have a lot of questions, but I'm not sure what those questions are just yet. Gotta educate myself a little more. So it's been good catching up with you guys. If you got any more questions, reach out to us at bigtomperkins@gmail.com. And there's also the Facebook page. You can go on there and like and follow. There's a YouTube channel. You can go check that out as well. Grazing Sheep Podcast YouTube channel. And so it's been good. It's been a good discussion. There's an awful lot here to ponder for sure. Gotta go
This
do.
is a fun topic.
I gotta
Thanks for
go do
having me
some
on.
contemplating on this. So it's been good having you, Andrew. Thank you again. And
You're welcome. Always enjoy it.
so we'll catch you guys later.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye.